for coming back to the show where we talk about speech pathology from a culturally responsive lens and how we could be more culturally responsive for our colleagues in our day-to-day lives. I'm so thankful to have on today Dr. Robin L. Dodds. If anyone is familiar with Dr. Robin L. Dodds, she is currently an associate professor and at a California university, and I'll let her do that introduction. But the reason why I brought her on here today is because she specializes in early childhood special education, and she has her own journey with navigating the special education system as both a parent and as a colleague of ours. And Dr. Dodds, when I spoke with you, you said, I knew what I was doing, and it was so challenging navigating the special education system. So
Mhm.
I'm really excited to have you on just to not only give us perspective, but also give us some strategies that we can share with the parents who we serve.
Right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yes, yes. So the first question I always like to ask our guests is, what is your why? Why do you do what you do?
Well, I think growing up, I've always been a helper, right? So some people are just feel like they were put on this earth to help other people, right? And from an early age, I felt like that was my calling. And I was told from very young that you're going to be a teacher. Oh, you're going to be a teacher. And I said, no, I'm an artist. And so for years, I walked away from teaching, even though I loved helping others. And I honed my skills in writing, and I went to graduate school and got an MFA in writing poetry. And then I was 23 and I had to figure out what was I going to do with my life because writing poems wasn't going to pay the bills. And so I came out to Los Angeles with my boyfriend, now husband of 23 years, and he was going to be a screenwriter and I was going to figure out what I was going to do. And I started teaching under an emergency credential, and that just kind of threw me right into a classroom. Um, and I found myself substituting for the early childhood special ed program, and found myself staying till 7 or 8 o'clock every night, printing out visual supports and developing all different lessons. And my principal said, would you like to take that position permanently? Because I was actually um, I was on a year-round school, and I was on vacation from a regular second grade class that I didn't really care for. And so I was like, yes, I would love to take that position. She's like, oh, good. It's easy to find a second grade teacher, but special ed is hard to find. And I feel like this calling has always been there, and I pushed it away for long enough, and then it came back around to me. And I feel just so blessed that something that I love and something that I find motivating and thrilling still. I started teaching in 2000, so I'm still finding it so thrilling, came to me. And so I feel really blessed that way, that sometimes these things are put into your path when it's the right time for you to find them.
So that's really interesting that you also have an MFA in poetry.
Yes.
So how would you say that the special education track and poetry track go hand in hand?
Well, special education really takes a lot of creativity because we do have our evidence-based practices, but the key to working with children with disabilities, or with anybody really, is to find what motivates them and to use that to help them grow. And so it's not a one size fits all kind of education. So, really being creative about how you approach teaching your students, how you motivate them. Even the simplest thing of reading a storybook theatrically can
Mhm.
make all the difference. And so my creativity, my kind of fearlessness in singing in front of people, or making a fool of myself in order to get the best out of my students, can really serve you well. But also, as I've gotten older, I've discovered that I am also neurodivergent, which is an interesting journey because we didn't have such a term when I was a young person, but I always felt like I didn't fit in, I didn't get the social cues and all of that. And I feel like that that's part of what drove me into creative arts, but that's also what makes me good at um, engaging with my students, understanding their challenges, and helping to be a role model on how you can use your strengths to bolster you and bring you up in the world and give you access to environments that normally would want to exclude you. So I feel like it all kind of works together. I do also write poems and storybooks for my students, but most of that creativity goes into designing lessons for kids to help them learn the skills that that our state or our country decides that kids need to know, but in a way that is going to be motivating to them and provide them with the satisfaction of having learned that. Rather than focusing so much on this is a deficit, you have to work on it. Well, this is something that you're going to want to do. So it that takes a lot of creativity.
It sure does. And I love how you reframe that as far as just having that satisfaction to learn it and to learn it
Yeah.
that way. So that's true service to me.
Well, I understand that, people with disabilities, they have to work hard all the time, and that's exhausting. And so, we have to help them build up the things that they love to do, that they're actually good at, that they excel at. We want to build those things too, so that they have the self-confidence to persevere when it's difficult. If we ignore the things that they're good at, then they feel like there's something wrong with me. Why do I always have to work so hard? I'm tired. But if they have something that they can feel accomplished and proud in, then that gives them the fortitude to move forward on some of the things that are harder for us. And I find that with myself. Sometimes it's a day where I just want to do easy tasks and check off the boxes on that. And that's what I have the energy for. And then other days, you are ready to dive into a project that you know is going to be challenging. And we read that in ourselves and we can self regulate that. But young children, they need our support to do that. And so we have to make sure that they do things that um, they find rewarding and affirming, and then intersperse that with things that might be a little bit harder, but we're using some of the motivation that we can use by using the things that they love, like their favorite characters, their favorite activities. We're going to try and use those things to get them to be motivated to go that next step, that next extra mile. Yeah.
Hmm. Wow. I definitely want to dig deeper into that. But first, I really want to just tell the audience a bit, if you could share with us your journey, especially when it comes to navigating the special education system.
So, I was kind of dumped into this as a teacher
Okay.
and started teaching 3 to 5 year olds. And so in early childhood special education, that's considered school age, even though most kids don't go to school at 3. But I had no idea about the early intervention system because that's separate from the school age system in this country. So the early intervention system is usually managed by um, the Department of Health and Human Services, right? And so that's more health related. But most of the students that I served were coming in transitioning from early intervention, and I had no idea about the early intervention model. I only knew preschool, right? So the first few years was about trying to figure out, where are they coming from? What does this look like? And trying to have empathy for the families once I figured out that early intervention is about providers like me coming into your home and coaching you so that you can be your child's teacher. Whereas once you get to preschool, it's school age, and the gate closes behind you and you're not allowed in anymore, or the child comes on a bus and you don't even know the people who are getting your child off the bus. So really having that empathy for how abrupt and how difficult a challenge that can be, especially when you're talking about a child who just turned 3 years old and may not be speaking yet. What's going on at school? How do you know? So my first, really finding out about those early intervention services, and then also trying to bridge that gap by inviting families in. Um, if they had the transportation and they were able to come, I want them to come in and be there, understand what we're doing, and then also providing them with some strategies that they can use at home to support their child in communication or potty training, or in their adaptive skills, like really just focusing on the things that probably are more universal to parents. Like they want their kids to talk, they want their kids to be able to use the bathroom by themselves. These are like the main things. Parents like to do academic activities with their young children, but for me, the focus was on more how can we prevent outbursts in public? How can we get our child to be able to go to the supermarket and behave in a certain way? How can we keep them busy so that they enjoy this activity and things like that? And so that was kind of my first foray into the world of special education. But then my son was born in 2004, and within about a year, I started noticing some differences from my daughter, who was 2 at the time. And he started lining up all of his toys. He had trouble with eating foods. He would vomit all the time. He just was easily calmed by like looking up at the trees, but didn't really like to be held all that much. And so I noticed his development was different. And then he didn't talk until he was 2.5. So I got really concerned at that point. Um, but even though I knew what I was doing, you still have to deal with your family. The whole family said, Robin, this is what you do for your living. You see autism, you see disability everywhere. He's a little boy, he'll be fine. They take longer. So I waited. And then by the time he was 3, he was speaking in like paragraphs. But
Mm.
I was the only one who could understand him because he was hypernasal. All the sound was coming right out of the nose. He was still vomiting all the time. He was so picky. He only ate 4 different foods at the time. Um, and by the time he was 4, I was just like, you know what? Everybody else was going to have to just calm down because he doesn't communicate back and forth. He'll hide and then say nothing, and then I can't find him in the house. It's stressful and scary. And so I took him to a developmental pediatrician. The first developmental pediatrician said, well, it seems to me like he's maybe has some delayed motor skills and ADHD, and maybe he has some, routinized behavior. And he was like kind of talking all around autism, but wasn't convinced at that point that it was autism. When he was 5, I took him to a different developmental pediatrician, and she said, Robin, you're right on. I think this kid, he is, at the time, his first diagnosis was Asperger's syndrome,
Okay.
because he's super bright. He was, able to articulate how characters in Thomas were feeling, but he couldn't understand how people were feeling.
Mm.
And so he kind of went under the radar for a little while. Once he got that diagnosis, it was a relief. And then I was able to access some support, some parent support services where we were living. Um, he, he was always in an inclusive setting. So that didn't change. And there's only 1 year of his life that he was in a self-contained classroom. That was in middle school, and middle school's terrible for everybody. It doesn't matter if you have a disability or not.
Mhm.
But the Asperger's turned to autism when they put out the DSM-5. He was still covered under the autism spectrum disorder. But then I had to navigate the IEP system from the other side of the table. And going to get him an IEP took three years in a row. I had him evaluated. And because he wasn't behind grade level in his academics, they wouldn't give him an IEP. They gave him speech language services on a 504 plan and a behavior plan on the 504 plan, but they wouldn't give him the IEP, and they said he doesn't meet the educational criteria for autism. And that was the first time I realized, which I should have realized sooner, the first time I realized that there was a big difference between the diagnostic criteria for autism and the educational eligibility for autism. His first IEP came when he was 7, and he was under specific learning disability because they did IQ testing, and his nonverbal IQ was crazy high, but then he had terrible working memory and all of that. And so he finally qualified for an IEP and got resource services on top of the speech. And then after 1 year, the district tried to take it away. They said, look he's back, he's above grade level. He doesn't need this. And I said, yes, he does. That's why he's doing well. He's getting the supports he needs. His teachers know he has an IEP. You've got a behavior plan that's working. And so they tried to take it away, and I wouldn't sign. I just said, no, I'm not signing. I said, and I had to say, actually, I'm a graduate student in special education, and I know that he qualifies, and you're going to take away his FAPE. And I've had to do that several times, even once I got my PhD. At one point in a meeting, they tried to push him into a self-contained classroom, and they called me Mrs. Dodds, and I said, actually, it's Dr. Dodds, and I have a PhD in special education, and I know that you're not supposed to decide the location of his services and the setting he's going to learn in before we get to this meeting. So let's continue talking about the supports that he needs.
Right.
And so I just came through this journey realizing that I'm a person who's educated in this. I'm a person who speaks the same language that the school speaks, not dealing with racism or anything. And this is incredibly hard. I've cried at every IEP, whether it be for wonderful reasons or for frustrating reasons. It's not easy. And so it's become my mission to support families who do not have the privilege that I have to be able to go into an IEP meeting and be a meaningful member of the team.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, thank you, Dr. Dodds, for sharing that story. I hope that everyone listening to this, just like myself, I was just completely blown away. I know that when we talked beforehand, you mentioned a little bit about it, but just to hear the full story and really feel the frustration that you felt going into these meetings.
Mhm.
Wow. And then I'm also just thinking about parents who might be overwhelmed with even more children and maybe even more children with special needs.
Yeah, I've served families. I've served a family that has had 11 children, and 8 of them had IEPs. And so, um, with varying levels of support needs, but it can be extremely overwhelming to manage the care of a child with a disability. The number of supports and services and healthcare services that they access is a lot. And when teachers talk about kids being spoiled, kids with disabilities being spoiled, I go, do you have any idea what these families are going through? Of course, this kid eats McDonald's every night. They're at therapies from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till 8 o'clock at night. They need to feed this child and get them home to bed. Like
Mhm.
think about, you have to think about what is going on when you're not seeing the child and the family. They're doing a lot to support their children. Many get services at school, but they also get them in the home and on an outpatient basis. Kids, just because they come in under one disability category doesn't mean that they don't have comorbid health conditions. Um, Parents who have kids who were preemies that lived in the NICU for the first 6 months of their lives, we know that causes a post-traumatic stress disorder in many parents. They've
Mhm.
almost lost their child multiple times. That changes the way you parent.
Yeah.
And we have to accept that they've gone through these experiences and not expect them to do the things the way that we want them to do them. We haven't been through that experience. So I think that um, it my experience humbled me as a teacher, to really think more critically about all the things that parents are trying to juggle. And then often they're juggling poverty as um, another stressor, because someone has to stay home with the child with a disability, which means, they have to live on a single income. And I've never lived somewhere where living on a single income was ever possible, so it's really, really challenging.
Well, let's, if we can, get into some strategies that you would
Right.
recommend for us as special education specialists, speech pathologists,
Mhm.
really to bridge the gap between parents and us.
Right. Well, I think the most powerful thing that can happen for parents is having peer support. So I think that number one, we want to make sure that families can meet other families that are going through similar um, experiences, and early on, because it's very isolating often to have a child with a disability. You're often even isolated from your own family. You don't go to family events because they're too overwhelming, or because your child needs to, you needs medical equipment that you can't travel with. And so I think that I always recommend, and I used to be on a board of directors for this program called Parent to Parent USA. It's p2pusa.org. And they have a program where they will match a parent of a child with a disability with another parent whose child is very similar to theirs, so that they can just talk on the phone or text each other. That's it. But it's magic, because you can complain to someone who understands. You can't complain in front of your girlfriends because they have typically developing kids and they have no idea. Or you can't make a dark joke in front of them. They won't understand. They'll think that you don't like your life or you're unhappy, and really just like letting off steam. And so I think that that's a wonderful thing. And if there's something where you live that that families can tap into, I tapped into something called Friday Nights that they had in Albany, New York, at the College of St. Rose. And they had it where kids with disabilities would come in, and they would do some programming with the kids. And there were also peer models that would come in. So my daughter was a peer model, and my son was in the program. And they would do activities. It was really not so much about the activities for the kids, more it was about a time for learning for the parents, but also connecting with other parents who had kids that were same age, and similar diagnoses, and you can just kind of chat about, oh, you see Dr. So and so, what did you think about that? And oh, I was thinking of getting an OT evaluation, but I think you might be, is it going to be too stressful? And you can just talk about all of those things, and that makes a big difference. Other things I would recommend for us to talk with families about is we need to ask them what's going well, right? So what part of your day is going really, really well? So there's always, even if there's difficult times during the day, there's one daily routine that usually is going well. So that's the daily routine where I would say, okay, so some of the strategies that we've worked on today, we can implement them into bath time. He loves bath time. Let's work on expanding his language during bath time, or you can hold things out for him to grab during bath time. Like um let's make those good times even more fruitful because the routine is working.
Mm-hmm.
What is a routine that you would like to help you with? How do you want it to look? Because sometimes we want it to look a certain way. Like for me, the kids need to be sitting at the table to eat dinner. Some families, that's not a priority. Like in my family, it was like we all sit around the same table at the same time and we eat dinner together. That was the rule. But a lot of families, that's not what they want. So we have to like find out what it is they want it to look like before we start prescribing to
Mm-hmm.
them. So I feel like that is a really important strategy. What would you like it to look like? How do you want, how would you want it to go? Have them imagine that. And that sets them up for that long-term planning, right? Because these children become adults. What's your vision for your child? You know, how do we get there? We are starting to have that conversation where we're talking about what are the next steps, and taking their values into account. We can't prescribe our values. We all come from, even if we come from the same culture, every family has their own set of values, and we need to figure out, what it is, what's the next step, what's the long-term goal. And then how are you going to hand over the reins of those goals to your child? So really planting the seed of some autonomy for that child. Now, not every family thinks independence is all that important, but autonomy is always important. People need to make their own decisions. How are we going to get her to start making some of her own decisions? And so I think that's important. What age do we start talking directly to the child rather than talking to the parent when they come in?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Really thinking intentionally about that. Yeah, so I think that's those are some of my top recommendations. It's really that listening, the that empathic listening, active listening, reframing what they say to make sure that you understand what it is that they want before you try and develop any sort of plan. Because too often I've seen people get paid a lot of money to come into a home and write a very extensive plan, but it's not aligned with anything that the family wants. And so it's useless. So I'd rather start small, and be aligned with their values and their goals than to give them something that's overwhelming and not something that they really want to do.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dodds, for sharing your wisdom. I mean, even you just coming on here is such a gift to the
Oh,
community, really. So thank you so much. One question I'd like to ask before we go, because I really could keep you on here forever and dig deeper on all of these things. These are like subtopics in and of themselves, so I'm not going to do that to you.
mhm.
So not this time. But what is something that you would like to see changed? I know we talked a bit, I know, right? Just first thing that comes to mind.
There's a lot. So, of course, I want to start big, right? I think that it's about time that we realize that disability is part of the natural expression of the human genome, and that people with disabilities have always existed, will always exist, and deserve a place in our society. And if we would do that, if we would include people with disabilities throughout their lifespan, we would have so much more of a sense of value of these people, because they are some of the smartest, most intuitive, and creative people that I've ever met. And I think that I've been blessed to be around children with disabilities. And if I give them that respect when they're 3, I hope that somebody else is giving them respect when they're 25, 45, 60 years old, and that they feel a part of our communities. So I think that that's the thing I'd like to see change most.
Of the bigger picture. If we have any questions for you, where can we find you?
Well, you can find me at Cal State Los Angeles, but if you want to find me on Instagram, I'm Robin Dodds 1975. And if you want to email me any questions, I'm happy, and I'm always a resource. It's rdodds@calstatela.edu.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dodds. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank
And
you,
everyone,
Melanie, for having me.
absolutely. And I do really hope to have you on here again, because you are doing other amazing things
Mhm.
that we didn't even get to tap into today. We barely
Yes.
scratched the surface. But thank you for everyone who joined live, and thank you for everyone watching the replay. Please come back next Wednesday. We'll be talking to Nakia Smith. Also, it's Charmaine on Instagram about Black ASL. Stay tuned. Bye, fam. Thank you, Dr.